Yeah, we can.
Benjamin, that background is amazing.
It's not, who said it's a background? It's my library.
When I saw the two, I thought like,
this is a real
we believe
library.
you, by the way. We actually absolutely believe you that this is your background.
Wow, you know, if y'all just left this, there would be a heated debate on this call. I've already been with Devine on a panel before in Kenya last year.
He nearly got me thrown off the stage, guys. So just that we are very clear. I was the innocent one, by the way, in that whole conversation. But I'm really excited to see you guys.
Steve, we need to make an adjustment. The panel is too Kenyan heavy.
Toukam is not from Kenya. Oh my gosh.
I'm adopted Kenyan.
No, we have Andrew.
Toukam, hold on to your other identities. Because there will be a whole Lion King going on here. You don't want it. Trust me. Trust. And I'm from Burundi, surely. So there's actually like 2 Kenyans.
Yeah, they're two and a half Kenyans, yeah. Burundi is always also claimed to be Kenyan anyway, like you've seen in the news recently.
Oh my gosh! I am not even going to go there. I'm just going to leave it because I'm a nice person, you know.
Yo, I told you, this panel. Wow.
I'm excited. Man, already shots fired.
Oh my God.
We haven't even started. Andrew, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. I think I've met Kenneth, Benji, Steve, but it's good to meet you, Toukam and Devine.
How have we not met? I've just left Kenya and then all of a sudden there you are.
See, Burundians always think they know everybody, but it's all right.
Oh, wow. This one, by the way, Stephen, I hope you're ready because this one could get hot. This one, with Benjamin on the panel, every panel that Benjamin is on, it always ends up. And right now, it's me and him. Toukam looks like he's going to be the nice one. And he's going to wonder what the hell is going on with these people. Kendra is going to keep us all accountable.
The last time I saw Andrew, he was speaking at a conference in London. This guy is a legend.
No, I've seen some of his stuff.
So Andrew, Mr. International, eh?
Mr. International.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Hey,
the humble brag. I get it.
All right, panelists, we're gonna get started.
She does, branding, so she knows all the tricks.
So, thank you guys for coming on. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come on. Thank you for, I know all of you are big deals. So for you to grace our event without getting $5,000, without getting $10,000 checks, that is a gift to us. That's a gift to FinMango. Thank you. By the way, I just made that up. I'm not saying any of these people get 10,000 or 5,000. Some of them are like, man, I want that money. I never got that much. But no, honestly,
Devine usually does. But yeah.
Thank you guys for coming on. So today we're going to be talking about the disruption, that's happening in the last couple of years. That's a buzzword, and I'm sure you guys are used to it. It's almost getting old to talk about the disruption, but because it's Africa and it's everyone, when they talk about the disruption, they always talk about Africa, right? And so I think it's very particularly important that as African leaders in the FinTech world, that you guys would address from the grassroots movement, because I barely ever see even Africans actually talking about it. It's usually like Westerners who are telling us what we're doing. And so I wanted to get an inside voice, from some of the key thought leaders, some of the key entrepreneurs on the ground, innovation, that are doing like some of the innovation on the ground, to just hear you guys' voices, to hear what's actually happening, and also to speak to the youth. The second thing we're going to talk about is sustainable development. Just how do we make sure it's the same thing that Benji talked about in his speech or in his keynote about how do we make sure that we have retention? How do we make sure that the development that we're developing, the innovation that we're creating is sustainable? It's actually solving real problems, not, to Warren Buffett's quote, not leaving us looking stupid. And then the last thing is we're going to just try to take time for you guys to speak to the youth, to some of the students, because like our demographic, our audience is high school students, college students, and young professionals. Speaking to them, what advice would you give them? And that is going to be mostly, of course, your heart for the continent. Because like, as I said, most of you had a chance to leave, but you're here. Most of you could have made a life outside, but you're here. And so let's move to the panel introductions. I'm going to start with you, Benjamin. Can you introduce yourself, your work? I know you already talked, but introduce yourself, your work, and what you do.
Cool. What's up, everybody? My name is Benjamin Fernandes. I'm from Tanzania, East Africa, best country in East Africa. But I'm going to get in big trouble on this panel. Anyway, I work in FinTech, financial services. Work with a company called Nala. Nala is a mobile money application that enables you to make payments, pay friends, and purchase airtime in Uganda and in Tanzania without internet across all your accounts. But yeah, that's what we do. And I think I picked the next person, Andrew.
My name is Andrew Mutua. I'm the founder and CEO of PesaKit. We've been at it since 2018, building alternative channels for distribution of financial services. My background is in software engineering, and I've been coding for the last 13 years. I'm excited to be on this panel. I met Scott. I've been a course with him at Harvard Kennedy School, and that's how we developed a relationship and got to introduce me to Finmango and I look forward to what Benji had to say about it. So, and on to
Devane.
Hi, hi everyone. My name is Devane Muragijimana. A dollar for anyone who can say that name, who is not on the panel, of course. I work for Sedulant as the chief of brand, and I'm really excited to be here because I'm really, I'm just completely always awed at the potential of young people and what young people can do for our continent. So essentially my job is to tell amazing stories, and it's to tell the stories that are moving the continent forward. And I'm really excited that I'm seeing a lot of work that is being done. If you look at 10 years ago and what we have been able to achieve so far. So I'm excited to talk about Sedulant and the work we're doing, but I'm also excited to really just deep dive into what this thing called FinTech and then young African empowerment actually means. So looking forward to this. I think the next panelist is who? Ken?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Kenneth Kinyanjui. Currently based in Nairobi, and I'm currently just recently started a new venture called Platfort, where we are building innovative IoT solutions for the agriculture and logistics space. But previously I had worked, was part of the team that actually founded WeCashUp, which is a payments company that has a footprint in a couple of African countries. And my background has been in computer science. So I've worked in various roles as a product manager and a software engineer. And I'm really excited to share this panel and grace this event, as Steven said, and just share knowledge on some of the challenges, failures, reflections that I have had and some of the panelists have had over the last decade with regards to FinTech.
Toukam?
Yes, so my name is Toukam. Just after the introductions, I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't have a rude job here. I work for a large company, so and I work for MasterCard, so I do a couple of things for them. I've done a lot of strategy. I've done some sort of run some of our fintechs. I'm based in Nairobi, from Cameroon originally, even though I have an American accent, so forgive me for that. I will pick. Can I pick the next person?
No. Okay, I didn't know because like you were having your voice wasn't coming in clear. I didn't know if you were still speaking or.
Can you guys hear me?
All right, we're gonna jump to the first question. All right, so you guys ready for this? Ready to get out your boxing gloves? We're gonna go to the first question: the fintech disruption trends. So, in you guys' opinion, and everyone on the panel as well as the audience, so put it on the comments. Please, if you want to answer this question as well, who do you think is going to drive the disruption, right, in Africa specifically? Big tech or some of the SMEs, like some of the fintech? Most of you are, the fintech, so you might be biased, but, who do you think is actually going to drive this disruption? And you guys can all answer. Let's start with Benji.
No, I was joking. I was gonna say big tech. Doesn't Cellulant count as big tech at this point because they raise big money? But no, I'm joking. I think the word. I'm always careful with the word disruption because I think I actually don't really like using the word myself. Because I just think when markets don't understand what it actually means, there's a defensive bar that pops up automatically across regulators, across people who work in the industry. And I think people are like, oh yeah, like look at these young folks trying to disrupt us. And it becomes like this aspect of really challenging them, and it becomes a lot harder for a lot of younger companies to start. The way I look at it is, I think the companies that will do really, really well, that simplify a current service, just making it faster, simpler, and more conveniently, and truly helping like the need or the problem getting solved, and hopefully in a cheaper way. So, whatever the industry is, I think folks who save people time, who make it cheaper, more affordable, and more efficient will succeed significantly across going forward. And I do think like the biggest, right now, I just saw in the news a few days ago, it says like, here are the top African brands or whatever, African companies. And if you look at the same thing in the US, a lot of the US ones are tech-led. And I think, if 10 years from today or even 5 years from today, hopefully a lot of the African ones will be tech-led companies versus large conglomerates that maybe deliver food or clothing across the continent.
That's good. Let's hear from you, Andrew. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, so I'm going to respond to it in two ways. The first bit, who is going to drive disruption? In my opinion, I think the regulators are going to drive the disruption in Africa. So in our industry where it's financial services, I think the new regulation that's coming out and the plans that I've seen regulators putting in place here in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, I think they're now starting to allow an equal playing field and a good environment for big or small companies to thrive in financial services. So I think regulators and their technology and what they're building now and what they're investing in will drive disruption moving on. We've already seen that in Kenya just a few months ago when the regulator seized access of the Credit Reference Bureau. So they closed it down so that digital lenders cannot access it. I think that has given banks an opportunity to innovate better, but also it's given the fintechs new ways of thinking about how to properly credit score customers and offer them credit and actually meaningful credit, not what is happening. So I think for me, I see regulators as the key to proper disruption in Africa. Then to the second phase, which is big tech versus fintech. I think fintech will always lead. We are very nimble. We are lean. I think we have the best ideas. But somebody else also argued that fintech companies are usually like the tests or the test ground for big tech companies. So you as a fintech, you'll go and make all the mistakes. You'll go and acquire all the new customers, test the new product, launch it into the market, then the big tech company will just copy you or buy you out. Probably just copy you because they have the resources to actually implement it in-house. And I've seen it with a lot of telcos here in Kenya. So many fintechs are quite innovative launching, but because we don't have the resources to scale, most of the telcos will just copy what you're doing and will be out of market in a short time. So I'm still for fintech or smaller. I think fintech is broad. So I would say fintech startups. Then as you grow, you need to find ways of always being competitive before the big guy copies you. Because most big tech companies are very hard for them to claim they're really innovative. Once you become a big tech company, most of them it's just acquire or copy and pasting.
So for you, Andrew, I want to do a follow-up question with you. What do you think for fintechs? What is the value that a fintech, as you say about innovation, what value do you guys bring that the big techs cannot or the banking institutions cannot provide when we're talking about value for customer?
I think understanding, I think what fintech companies have done very well, and specifically startups who I see here in Africa have done very well, is understanding the customer needs. It's just fintechs are really solving consumer needs and solving it very well. And I think that's the biggest differentiator. Like when you look at what we're doing at PesaKit, what Nala is doing with the user experience. So the big companies can offer all the mobile money services, but the user experience and convenience and security is what you get with Nala. The big companies like M-Pesa are giving agents they're enabling agents to become businesses by offering cash in, cash out. But really what PesaKit is doing in between is allowing these agents to be more repeatable, be more convenient for their end consumers, be more reliable. And I think those are things that are the key that matters to most of the consumers we are serving. So for us, I think the biggest advantage we have is we are solving big customer problems and we are solving them very well. The only disadvantage is probably just the ability to scale, because most telcos or most companies have already got into that space.
So I'm gonna go to Toukam. Toukam, you are the director of strategic growth.
And then the dark force in the room, the big evil large company.
No, that wasn't on purpose. That was not on purpose.
I'm just kidding. No, but look. I think Andrew has a point, right? Like, I mean, I think that it's true. When you become as big as we are, right, it's harder to innovate, right? Because, and I think you all see that, like, whether it's Benjamin or Andrew, whoever else, I think the bigger you become, you start having more serious shareholder responsibilities, right? You start worrying a lot more about risk. So I think that it's just a natural, tension you have to deal with, right? Like, success means that, it comes with attention, right? But if we were to add to what he would say, like, look, for me, I think, like, the way I look at it, it's all of the above, in the sense that there's still opportunity, right? Like the way, for example, at MasterCard, when we talk about like the market, is like, look, the enemy in our view is cash, right? When you look at today, like with inclusion, right? Like you look at across just like globally SSA, right? Inclusion today, only about what 42% of people like, like included, and that's just counting accounts, right? Like whereas when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, so it's just globally, that number is about 81% or something, right? So for me, like, look, so if you do the math, the gap, if you were just to achieve the global average, right? That's enough people across a lot of like, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and then with 20 million left has changed, right? I feel like there's a lot of opportunity. And that's what I feel like, look, for me, it's an ecosystem approach. There are things that like, the Nalas of the world, right, like are good at doing. And there are things that, we're good at doing, right? Like when you talk about scale, like we can connect people to the right kind of large, entities that can give you the scale you want, right? But we're not, Prestige is not, like building the little fine-tuning the consumer experience. That's not the stuff that we're good at, or at least not good at anymore, as much as might have been in the past. So for me, I think it's like, look, it's an all of the above, right? There's a role for different people. I think the way, Andrew, you brought about our regulators, right? That regulators have a role to play. Large companies like ourselves have a role to play. Right, fintechs that are more nimble have a role to play. And I think it's just sort of finding that role you have to play, and then doing that well.
So let's, thank you.
Can I just introduce a bit, Stephen, sorry. I think one thing we're forgetting a bit, I keep hearing big tech, FinTech, and I'm just wondering whether we actually have examined the role of FinTech in Africa, because a lot of, I mean, to be honest, unlike many other places in the world, Africa still remains underserved, right? If you look at just the sheer number of people who don't have financial access, and in this case, financial services access. And if you look at just essentially, if you look at the bottom of these guys we're calling the bottom of the pyramid. So Africa is not, as a continent, if you look at Africa as a market, and I hope we're not going to do that, but if you look at just every country, there's still massive numbers of people who are not reachable. So if you even think about, even if big tech comes into Africa, they will still need FinTech. They'll still need the services that are offered by FinTech, because FinTech's role in Africa is not to disrupt, it's to build. It's actually to build the financial services or the financial industry, so to speak. And I think if we put big tech, FinTech, and there's an opportunity for collaboration, I think that's where the big win is going to be, when the two actually can collaborate, when the two can understand that the strength of FinTech is actually to build the industry, and then big tech comes in and actually gives us the access to the masses, which is, I mean, their play is numbers. So if there's a collaboration, that's actually where the win is going to be. But I think the role of FinTech still will remain the enabler, the builder of the financial industry, no matter whether big tech or whichever tech comes into Africa.
Yeah, I want Kenneth to respond to this, because Kenneth, you have been a startup, genius, have done a lot of work in that field, and then you've also worked a little bit with Google and kind of been in that kind of middle ground. When we're talking about trust, we know in Africa, in any market, honestly, in any market, trust of the customer base is very important. And so when you're looking at the big tech, so when people might see Nala, they might be like, I don't know Nala very well, but I know Google, right? I have my email, my YouTube, everything, right? I know Visa, I know MasterCard, right? So what is that play? How are FinTechs going to earn the trust of the African consumer?
Yeah, so to respond to this, you bring out a very interesting question. So the way I look at this question, I start with defining disruption. And I like the way Benji doesn't like that word. I too don't also like it. But when according to Clayton Christensen, the late, he describes it as, bringing innovation and distribution together. And when you're able to bring those two together, that is when you're able to have a sort of type of leap, or what people AKA call disruption. And when you look at FinTechs or these smaller startups, innovation happens in smaller teams, right? So that is where you're gonna see people like focusing on customers and problems, and really coming up with really amazing value propositions, which you've seen with Nala, PesaKit, and a lot of other companies. But then on the distribution side, this is where you see big tech that's been there for a longer time. They've sort of found a way to sort of distribute. So you find the Cellulants, the MasterCards, the Googles, and all that. And when you talk about distribution, this is not just like being everywhere, it's also their brand, trust, and all this. And I'll pick up a story, for instance, or an example with Google and one of their teams called the Next Billion Users. What they did in India, where they went and talked to the government, and they were able to come up with the UPI, which is a universal, I think it was like a universal gateway that was sort of like a bridge or a gateway that allowed startups and other people to build on top of the infrastructure. So of India to sort of now foster the next generation of innovation. So you find that big tech has a role to play in terms of because of their distribution and the trusts and their brands, they can be able to get into doors and drive conversations that a typical startup wouldn't be able to drive. And so it's all about Do we see acquisitions where they're coming together and working together? We see innovation and distribution coming together. Do we see partnerships? And some of the challenges I have seen is that as a startup, it's really even hard to get on these conversations with this big tech, because they're like, who are you guys? And, so there's challenges there. I think probably the question will be, how can we take advantage of, or how can we come together to sort of build, as Devin said, instead of looking at it from disruption, let's look at how can we build, for Africa or for emerging markets. So I think for me, it's been with the big techs, to answer your question, it's been when they have a big part in distribution, have a big brand, have all this, they have trust. They're able to actually drive conversations with government, drive policies and all that. And that makes the work easier. So that's what I've seen, and a good case is that one with Google and their work in India.
Okay, so I wanna kind of talk about something Devin talked about, and as well as you, Kenneth. It's the idea of big tech and fintech or SMEs working together. Is that a dream, or is that actually possible? Are they competitors, or is it possible to work together? So I'm gonna actually go to Benji. I wanna talk about this with you, because you see Zazu and MasterCard, they have this partnership. Is that the kind of partnerships we want to see, where Zazu, got, this partnership with, MasterCard to give their consumers an ability to go global and use their digital money as a card and transact everywhere? Like, is that the kind of relationships we're talking about, Devin? And I'm just gonna maybe open it up for all of you to kind of like fight, but is it actually possible to actually partner, or is this a dream? Let's go with you, Benji, first.
Yeah, thank you. I think so, right? So MasterCard or Visa, reach out to a lot of fintech. So we've been having discussions primarily with the Visa team. Sorry, Toukam. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, looking at like what we can do in terms of like whether it's issuing virtual cards or physical cards, obviously there's big challenges, right? So for example, I think one of the biggest challenges you face in Africa is scaling. So for example, in the United States, you have Stripe, or you have Aldi, where any fintech company can build on top of that, then they have access to massive market. I think it was what Kenji was talking about earlier. Like in India, you have UPI, in Europe, whether it's PSD2 or other services you can build on top and create an enabling network. I think, one thing that's challenging is because we don't have this, because we don't have like maybe even a Plaid-like service for Africa that's scaled. It also makes it harder for fintech companies to build there, because what you notice is a lot of fintech companies are building the infrastructure as well as the B2C consumer facing product. And it becomes really expensive, really time consuming, and it's so hard to do that well. The other piece, like speaking of Zazu and MasterCard, the challenge you have there is, banking as a service, right? The smart banks today in Africa understand what that means. But it's rare. I've talked to, I think, 20 of the 60 banks in Tanzania, and you bring up the word banking as a service, and people are like, what does that even mean? And it's like, it's from scratch. You have to educate the banks. This is how it works. It's called platform banking. I need an issuing bank where I still own the customer. The money is still stored with you. You can make, the deposits are coming to you, so you can make your money there. And trying to like air out, okay, what are the pros and cons or the benefits of that? Has been really, really hard for many African fintech companies, because the educational piece of teaching like the large banks or large institutions comes back onto you. And then it also creates a trust factor, a trust piece that becomes harder. So, my hope is that, the MasterCards, the Visas, or the Union Pays or something, that are operating here can also help big banks understand, how and why they need fintech companies, especially when they can really focus into one small area and do it super, super well. So I do think that there is collaboration and room for that opportunity that's available. Even with Celilant, for example, Celilant is big tech, in my opinion. The moment you raise anything above 10 million in Africa, you're massive tech. So, when you have the big budgets like that to flex, I think what they create for us is a platform. So let's say, if we wanted to do, let's say, reselling of airtime in multiple countries, or, remittances in multiple countries, it enables us to do that where, traditionally we would have to go to that country and build relationships with the telecoms or the banks in order to distribute there. So I think there is massive room for collaboration. I think it's long from where it needs to be. And my hope is that all parties collectively can collaborate. And I hope to see more efforts from the big tech to help us small folks.
Yeah, let's transition to Toukam. Toukam, what do you think about this partnership?
I think, look, I agree in many ways, right? I think the other challenge here, and this is where I think maybe tying back to Divine, so Divine is still agreeing on something today, is the idea of, that like the opportunity is massive, right? Because I think the other challenge, I think, looking at banks is when you take a market, like, like we look at the bank, like if you take a bank's balance sheet, something I've done a lot, right? Most banks don't make money from payments, right? They don't make money from, like bank fundamentally in this part of the world is I collect deposits and I lend to large multinational companies or to large local corporates, right? That I think the other push here is sort of looking and saying, when you look at the banking landscape, is it competitive enough that banks are forced to sort of like be looking for those new revenue sources and growth areas that then eases, like engagement with fintechs, right? Because a lot of these banks, I mean, you look at a lot of the banks, like most of the money comes from just interest, right? They've bought, you look at a lot of banks, they've bought government bonds and they've lent to like really large companies. That's it. So I think it makes it tougher, right, to have those conversations. I think we're talking about, Benji. But I do think that, like, look, there is opportunity, and that's why I said in the beginning, to me, look, it's an ecosystem thing, right? That like MasterCard does not have the reach, like the kind of insight and, you would have into consumer, right? Like, we might have sort of the rails for saying like, hey, look, maybe you want to do international payments. We can think about who you link you on. But I think that for me, fundamentally, it is about like, so I think like it is about partnership. I think it's figuring out, and working through, I think just the challenges of being human, right? Like, because I think some of the stuff is just human beings. We're naturally competitive, right? And so when, Benjamin shows up, I'm like, he's trying to eat my lunch. What can I do to make life difficult for him? Benjamin thinks I'm stupid because I'm a big company, right? So I think it's one of those things that we just have to walk around, just realize you're dealing with people, and that, with people you need convincing, right? That there's some human element of it, but I think for me, it's market dynamics. Like it's market dynamics, because I know they look at even this market. You take, for example, that we talk about customer reach, right? Safaricom has like the most powerful customer reach, right? Like they touch so many people. There are more people, like on M-Pesa than there are banking customers in the country, right? And if all we're doing is going to look for, banking customers, then we're not doing inclusion, to your point, Divine, around like the opportunity, right? There's massive opportunity. And it's figuring out what role does a company like MasterCard play in going down to some of those people that, people haven't gone to versus, what role does, Cellular play that, we cannot do, even if we wanted to. But I think it's a mix of between like markets love and just human behavior that, people are complex.
All right, so Andrew, I want to come to you. So you could say it's a utopian idea that you've been brought up of this partnership, and maybe with Benji's calling Cellulant a big tech. Do you think it's do you think it's because maybe Cellulant is a big tech, and so it's easier to say, hey, partner with us, or maybe for someone from like a MasterCard or Visa say, hey, partner with us? But as someone, and Andrew I think just left, but let's hear from some of you guys, especially Kenneth and Benji. Do you guys think this is actually possible? And maybe Divine, you can chime in to defend yourself after that. So Kenneth, do you think it's actually possible to like this partnership? So you were talking about this, it's a, some people might call it utopian, right? Where you have competition, right? There's winners and losers. So how do we work together as some of the large institutions that sometimes are buying people out, or is that the only way to partner? What's the best middle ground for partnership between fintechs like SMEs and like big tech companies? How do they both become win-win? How do we create a win-win situation?
I think when I look at it and look at some of the challenges I faced a while back when, we were working on, I was working at WeCash Up and the person actually going towards driving these partnerships was that it's not that these companies were not in the position to do a partnership, only that it wasn't an intention probably that they had. So you find that there was actually like no dedicated team thinking about that. So you are trying to just like talk to someone else, and that is not their objective at the time, or they have a lot of other chasing priorities, and that makes it even tougher to even you start a conversation but there's no follow through. That was one, and so to have a partnership, there's a lot of work involved from both sides. So from the corporate side, from the startup side. So you either find the startup is maybe not at the level where the company can do a partnership with them because probably they're not yet prepared, they've not defined what they want. And then it could be on the other side where the corporate is at a point in their cycle where this is not probably a priority for them, or they are not prepared, or they are not planned for it. So that now becomes a challenge. And so for me, it's like, okay, some of the corporates could create, or there could be a discussion on how to create an environment that sort of fosters this. One way or one strategy that we've seen with some of these other companies is that they have a M&A team, mergers and acquisition team, or corporate business development. And with those type of teams, you'll end up seeing, with those type of teams, you now see those conversations being driven, and people now starting to sort of acquisition starts to happen, and people start having these conversations. And this partnership starts to start becoming a possibility. So those are some of the few things that I have seen. And if you look, I've not seen so many fintech acquisitions in Africa, to be honest. We've not seen so many. We've not seen that exit market. We've not seen that. So yeah, not so many. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but they're not as.
I thought Jumia always claimed that they were that was not successful.
Well, but that's not an exit. That's not they were listed publicly. That's an exit for their investors. But we've not seen so many mergers and acquisitions happening. Let's say Visa or this. I know they do happen, but they're not at I'm not saying that they don't happen, but they do happen, but they're not happening at that velocity where you will want them to happen, because what you will see is what Andrew was calling copycat. So you'll just see, oh, we can actually build it here. So then the startup dies. So you'll just see like, why don't we just build it? We don't need this startup, instead of actually doing those acqui-hires, getting these talents in and finding that. I've seen a couple of this happen, and MasterCard, I think, got Duka Connect, and I've been seeing some of them happening. That's why I said I'm aware that they are happening, but I don't feel like they're happening at the rate at which it's not just supposed to be a MasterCard only. It should be many other big tech or many big companies doing leading this front end, these conversations.
All right, so to close out this section, I'm gonna give it to Devine. So Devine, you're a storyteller, as you told us in the beginning, and just writing this story and trying to, especially for the youth, what does it tell us, when I think even like, right, it's a beautiful story if like you have this unity where you have these big techs or these big, conglomerates coming in, helping the little men on the ground or helping the people with funding. Is that actually possible? And can you answer once and for all for Benji and all those who doubt that, for Cellulance, are you a big tech or are you not?
Benjamin was meant to bring trouble, but I think let me look at this way. Let me put it this way. First of all, for the guys who are listening, so they let me summarize it and say, first, if you are passionate about solving problems and you're passionate about making access happen, because that's what FinTech, at the end of it, that's what it does. It makes access happen for the people who would not have financial access to things like investment, savings, making payments and receiving money. I mean, very basic things that we take for granted. I think FinTech is the place to go. And I always encourage people when they're young, go work for a FinTech. Don't, I think some people just jump into entrepreneurship. You go ahead and find somebody like Nala, who I'm sure they're hiring. I'm sure Benjamin is hiring. So, you know, you find someone you can learn from. You find someone who's been there and actually learn from. I think there's a big opportunity on FinTech, and actually this thing we're calling FinTech, which is vast, actually disrupting the way people work, the way people live, the way people access goods and services, right? But I think when you talk about Ceduland being a big tech, I think one thing is, first, let me take that as a fantastic compliment to Ceduland, so thank you so much. But I think big tech, when I'm thinking about big tech, I'm not thinking, in fact, I don't know if there's a big tech in Africa, first of all. Let me just put it that, in the sense that we are still figuring out the scale and the amount of scale we need. For example, if you look at the work we're doing in Nigeria, we are still building. So when I'm thinking about big tech, I would say, yes, we are a big company. Yes, we have scale across the continent. We have about 18 markets. But does that make us big tech? And does that make us, it doesn't actually take us out of the competition, to the fact that if somebody wanted to really come and disrupt and invested more money than what we have, or is able to actually figure out and crack the code of providing the best services, are we actually going to be safe, so to speak? Because, you know, when you put us in big tech, it means that we are safe from the competition, but we're not. I think the one thing that we don't take for granted as Ceduland is that we understand the mandate the business has. We understand that our mission means that we actually have to continue innovating. We have to continue figuring out how do we offer the best services at scale, and then make a real impact. That's why we partner with people like MasterCard to make sure that people have things like a virtual card. I think that was just the most recent partnership we had with MasterCard. And then you are partnering with people to make sure that, for example, in Nigeria, we have many partners who we're working with to make sure that, for example, people have access to insurance, people can save. And so these things we're calling micro lending. So we're partnering with a lot of people from the different industries to make sure that this thing we're calling, this is Ting, this platform, this payments platform we have, actually people can plug in and offer services to our massive number of customers that we have without having to build their own platform. So I think, one, collaboration is important, but it's very hard. So we need to make collaboration easy among ourselves. Two, I think we need to open ourselves to the fact that we need to continue building as fintechs to make sure that when big tech does come, they are finding us ready to collaborate. Because also sometimes it's hard that I think that we still have a lot of work to do as far as providing the right tech, the right platforms for collaborations to happen. So I think that's my parting shot. Possible. It's not a dream. We've seen it happen, but I think we as fintech, or the African fintech space, has still a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything to respond to that before we move to our next prompt? All right, so we're gonna move to the second prompt. Now, this is going to be a little maybe fiery, because we're looking at the World Economic Forum. We're looking at the topic of just sustainable development, looking at innovation, and looking at real problems as far as, like, you know, the international bodies that are saying that these are the key issues that we're looking at. So any African leader, anyone who loves Africa, anyone who is in economic, you know, just thought leadership, or you're a CEO trying to plan the future of your company, when you see an article like this, it's probably something to take a look at. So let's go to Benji. Like, let's just go straight to you. With that list, with those 5 things, and I know they added more things, do you agree with that list, or is there any more that you would add?
You say the 5 things again?
Yeah, so we have from underemployment. So you have the first risk as underemployment in Sub-Saharan Africa. You have the risk of underinvestment in infrastructure, so the infrastructure problem. And then you have fiscal crisis. And then you have the political change, like just the governments and the political changing system. And so you're looking at some of these things, and then of course we're looking at climate change. So some of the rough climate in Africa. So these are the things that would say are affecting some of the economic crisis in the countries in Africa. So is there anything that you would add? So most of you are working on the ground, grassroots. Are these the biggest issues, or from your research, from working as a FinTech, which FinTech is really looking at customer, what are the needs of the customer on the ground? And that was like one of the things that you guys spoke about. The beauty about FinTechs is that you guys are very in touch with the needs of the customer. So with this article saying, hey, we're looking at underemployment, so youth unemployment is really high. We're looking at the infrastructure, it's rarely there. We're looking at climate change, just with like droughts and different things like that. And we're looking at the political changing system, just with the political leadership, government, infrastructure, regulation. Are there things that you would add to that list? Are there things that have been challenging for you as a FinTech to build or to address?
Yeah, I'll keep my go on, and I can keep my answer short. I think the list is exhaustive, and I think there are many sub-parallels that are built from that list, right? So I think we could collectively sit here and probably write down 5,000 things to add to that list. But I think as general categories, I think they're quite substantial. But I'll hand over to Andrew.
I think for us at PesaKit, one thing that we see that's on this list, but not exhaustive, is actually infrastructure for access to financial services. So one of the biggest advantages that Safaricom has had with M-Pesa is the infrastructure of agents. And that has been a good touch point for them to onboard customers, for them to train customers, and for them to teach them about the products that they have. The example that Kenneth gave about UPI, the Unified Payments Interface in India, it's actually part of the infrastructure to drive access to financial services. So enabling other ecosystem players to connect to it and build on top of it. So I think apart from just infrastructure in terms of roads, electricity, we also need infrastructure for financial services. So I'm not sure who will own this. In many places, you find this infrastructure is owned by big tech companies. In some cases, like India, most of it is by the regulator with the UPI and everything else they're doing with identity. So I think for Africa, moving on, we need to invest in digital infrastructure for us to build the next products and services for our consumers.
Thank you. Toukam, your mic, you're muted.
Sorry, I think that was the same thing I would say, right? Infrastructure, and I'll take a more expansive view, because I think, Andrew, I agree with your point, right? Like, I think people tend to think infrastructure, they think water, power. I would say I'll take a more expansive view. It's healthcare infrastructure, right? It's financial infrastructure, it's even regulatory infrastructure, right? Because, I mean, I think those play, like regulation plays a significant role in these markets, right? And you look at the case of like, an M-Pesa that, like the government essentially had to innovate from a regulatory perspective, right? Like, to sort of let that happen. So I would say, like, for me, it's more expensive, because for me, I feel like if you have that infrastructure in place, like, look, I think a lot of us, like growing up in Africa, like, you're an entrepreneur, whether you like it or not, right? Like, just life is just a hustle. So, a lot of us are naturally like entrepreneurs. I think it's more that, like if you have the right infrastructure, I think that unlocks a lot of things. Like when I look at the case of China, for example, I mean, like, in my view, a lot of success in China was infrastructure, right? It's that, the roads were built, electricity and all these things, and, like just financial infrastructure such that, look, people are, they're smart. A lot of people will know what to do. They will know how to sort of like, like they will see opportunity, they'll go after it. But I think the challenge, again, to me, I feel like one of the biggest bottlenecks is infrastructure. So I'm totally like in agreement, and I think I'll agree with him that I take a more expansive view of infrastructure than maybe just road and power, and the infrastructure is a lot more than those things that come to mind.
Yeah, we'll take a different turn here and go to Devine. just with in the fintech space, some of what people would say is that fintechs are able to solve some of the problems as far as financial services, financial inclusion, and financial literacy, you could say. So you're looking at the way you guys have inclusive economic growth as far as like these countries that are underrepresented, underserved. So for Divine, what is Cellulant, or what are you guys doing to make sure the sustainable development that, you know, this is not the story that continues for Africa? And then I'm going to have you guys respond to the same question. What is Inala doing? What is the platform that you're building, Kenneth? What are you guys doing with PesaKit, Andrew, to solve some of these problems? And maybe even talk about the challenges. What are your top 1, 2, 3 challenges that you see that you are trying to address? So Divine.
All right, thanks, Stephen. I think let's I'm going to do this from our foundational and what we understand as the foundational problem and the challenge that we as Cellulant are solving. And this is really around what we call market fragmentation. So today, if you look at just even when you talk about, there's this even problematic nomenclature, and this one is how we just call problems. We talk about market fragmentation as a whole, but if you break it down and if you go back into the challenges that, or our conversation around infrastructure, is that there is a fragmentation around how goods and services are delivered in each sector. So overall, if you look at each sector, it has its own fragmentation. If you look at the whole market, if you look at, for example, how people access goods and services from the basic in any country, in any region, it's fragmented. So there's just the fact that there are no market linkages presents a huge opportunity, but a huge challenge. So based on that understanding, that our job as Cellulant is to really provide linkages, to provide platforms where these linkages can happen. What we're really doing is to make sure that things like, for example, the fact that if you look at the 4 maybe fundamental issues that we see in our everyday work that we are trying to address, one of them being, of course, financial insecurity. We're looking at unemployment being a huge, underemployment being another result of this fragmentation. We're looking at income security, so people actually not being able to make enough money to meet their basic needs as another result of this fragmentation. And this is maybe just to name a few, but if you look at that holistically, what we're really doing is creating platforms. Today we have a digital payments platform and a digital marketplace. One is called Ting, the other one is, the payments is called Ting, the marketplace is called Agricole. And what we're really doing is now embedding the solutions. So trying to figure out if we could actually create a platform where people can access financial services at the very basic. So whether you have access to internet or you have a basic phone, if you are sitting in the village somewhere, can you actually access the financial services? And then to the even more complicated of in agriculture, which is what we're doing with the digital marketplace in Nigeria, making sure that a farmer can provide their goods at a very reasonable price and a good price that is constant. So they're constantly aware that if I provide goods to this company, I can actually make a living. And making that possible so that a farmer can make a living by providing their goods to a food processing or factory, a food processor somewhere in maybe Lagos. So if you connect somebody from Zamfara, which is in the north of Nigeria, to somebody who is producing rice maybe in Lagos or in Abuja, by making those linkages, you find that an entire ecosystem, you're creating jobs. So at the farmer is able to produce more, so they're able to provide employment. They're able to actually now secure their income as a family. They're able also to empower their community. Then you go into what we're calling a community aggregator, who is the person who sits between essentially the farmer and the food processor. They are also now have constant income that they are assured because the platform is there and the platform is working. For the food processor, these big businesses, we're assuring them that they will get good quality and they'll be able to connect to the market at the rate that they want to. So by enabling those kind of services and creating a platform, what you're able now to do is ensure that everybody along the value chain actually is assured that I don't have to serve, I'll have a job, and at the end of it, that my income is actually secure. And then, of course, then at the long line, you've connected now linkages. You've connected the food processor to the farmer, without the food processor having to leave their comfortable office, maybe in Lagos, and going to Zamfara, right? So those are the things that we're seeing, and those are the things that we're really passionate about solving, and making sure that at the end of the day, we have food security, because food insecurity in Africa is huge. About 20% of Africa is starving. If you look at, let's just call it what it is. So you make sure that there's food security, there's financial security, there's employment, so people can get jobs. So youth, when they get out of school, they'll have basically a place where they can find a job. And then you make sure that income security is assured for anybody who actually plays within the ecosystem. So that's how we're solving that problem.
Man, it's a lot to follow up. Kenneth, can you answer this? So what is Platform doing to address some of these things? You're muted.
Hello. That's a tough one. We're just nine months old. So the way we approach it is, when me and my co-founder were starting the company, our goal or objective was, how can we make technology accessible for good? And when you think about that, is we were looking at, okay, all this amazing innovation in the field of sensors, IoT happening, but it's still not accessible to masses, and we were like, okay, this tech, while it's good and it's gonna do a lot of great things and foster the next frontier, it's still not accessible. It's very expensive and all that. So we asked ourselves, okay, how can we actually make some of these solutions accessible to industries such as agriculture or logistics, and make them a reality, not just like good stuff to talk about. We're just seeing like, oh, it's amazing to have IoT. IoT can do this, but we wanted to go to the next frontier and say, okay, yeah, it's good that it can do this, but let's see it doing stuff and see it moving the needle. And that's, for us, what we're trying to do is basically to ensure that these solutions or technology are, one, accessible, easy to use, and cost effective, right? So if you can be able to make those solutions achieve that criteria, then once they meet that criteria, the next thing is to ensure that they are actually offering value and to those consumers. So in our case, we were looking at, okay, how can these solutions improve production for some of the agricultural value chains we're looking at? How can we help farmers to produce more milk? How can we enable logistics or supply chain to move efficiently? How can we reduce some of the losses that are experienced while you're transporting goods, and that through effective monitoring? So that's the sort of mindset that we have, where we're saying, okay, there's this amazing and cool innovations that are being built, but how do we actually now tailor them and make them accessible to industries here in the continent and in Kenya per se? So I can say that, we have our first device that we've built, and we're looking to try and see how we can get more of this technology in the hands of customers to drive more value. So that's how we sort of approach this. It might not be fintech per se. Right now I'm not doing fintech, but I do see the role of fintech playing and overlapping in some of the activities that we do in the future.
So let's move to Benji. Can you respond to that? For you in Tanzania and Uganda, what are the top issues or challenges that you're seeing that are hindering, sustainable development? And then what is NALA doing to address those issues?
For me, it's simple. I think transaction history. Most people don't know how much they're moving across their accounts. Most people don't understand, how much they're paying and what that looks like. And so, in Uganda or in Tanzania, your average person owns 1.96 SIM cards, so more than 2 accounts. So in Uganda, it's very often we find people with both MTN and Airtel SIM cards. In Tanzania, it's like either Vodacom and Tigo, or Airtel and Tigo, or Airtel and Vodacom. And so because of those behavioral patterns, we've been trying to find out, okay, how do we just enable them to understand their spending better? For example, if you want to get your transaction history in Tanzania, you have to go to a Vodacom shop and pay them about $4 just for a monthly statement. If you want to get your Tigo transactions, you can get it via mobile, but it costs you, I think, about 28 cents just for a monthly statement. And these are things I think should be free for people because they're using that platform for services. And then what's even more interesting is not just getting it from a single telecom, but getting it across all the telecoms and be able to understand your information even better. Because if you get your statement from like a Vodacom and let's say a Tigo, you still have to do the mental work of trying to understand the information across two statements versus what we do at Nala for free for users is just combine it all in one and allow them to see their true spending and how they're actually looking at their money to make better decisions financially. So I think there are infrastructural issues and challenges that pop up and with incumbents that are on the ground, but these are some of the little things that we do to try to support people in those two markets.
Thank you, Andrew and Toukam. Let's start with Andrew.
Okay, so here in Kenya, there are about 9.2 ATMs, about 5 bank branches, and about 535 mobile money agents for every 100,000 people. So these mobile money agents are the face of where Kenyans access financial services and where most of the underserved across the world go to be served. And those are the people who PesaKit is serving. So what we do as PesaKit, we provide agents an ability to rebalance their liquidity easily and also provide them liquidity when they don't have it. Because even with the success of mobile money, with the success of M-Pesa, Airtel, Tigo, and all the other big businesses, supply side liquidity is still a big challenge. So when you want, let's say, to top up your account, when you go to an agent, they don't have enough float to do that. Or if you want to withdraw, they don't have enough cash for you to be able to do that. So that's where we are operating as PesaKit. And we're seeing lots of impact because first is we're enabling these agents to be able to serve more customers. Meaning they're getting meaningful employment for the work they're doing. They're getting more income and more commissions from serving customers. The other bit is we're also enabling them to improve their financial health by providing them with insights and analytics of how better to manage their finances, how best to manage their business, and even for all this liquidity that we're providing, how best to utilize it so that they can optimize their operations better. So those are the areas where I see a lot of impact around PesaKit. The other bit that we started doing two months ago when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country, we introduced a hospital cash insurance cover for our agents, where for just 1,000 shillings, about $10, they're able to get an income safety net. So if they get admitted because of COVID-19, quarantined, or even in ICU, they still get daily income because they're missing an opportunity to work at their business. So those are the areas where I'm seeing we're having a lot of impact on agents and agents being very critical to the financial infrastructure of Kenya and Tanzania. It's enabling us also to have a positive impact on the lives of the consumers they serve. You're on mute, Steve.
Toukam?
Oh, yeah, I volunteer my spot to Divine, so Divine again.
So what?
So like, look, I think we do, I mean, it's different kinds of level, right? We're obviously a very large company, right? So there is sort of the work that, like at least I'll speak a lot of what we have, like I'm aware of and that I've been involved in. I think tying some of what Divine was saying, right? We've done some stuff in education, and the idea was just looking at, well, when you look at a lot of East African markets today, parents are spending an enormous amount of money to make school fee payments because something around like 80% of those or more are still in cash, right? This is cash as in like I have to get cash and walk to a bank to try to make that payment. Right? You look at on the school side, just like leakage with money, right? Most schools today in the region, I mean, when a school collects 60% of what it's supposed to collect, that's like, that's Christmas. And when you look at government leakage, right? A lot of our governments are trying to support education with capitation grant, but like, the leakage is enormous. So like there, we came up with something to say, okay, can we look at something that, fits in the ecosystem, right? Like, that allows parents, for example, to make mobile money for education, and for schools sort of receive that in a way that is easily, like irreconcilable for them. Because that happens today, but it's not easy to reconcile. In sort of agriculture space, which I think design talked about quite a bit, we do have solutions there where when we take a view in SME space, we take a view of like, look, agriculture or like farmers and a lot of those are SMEs, right? Looking at saying, okay, like, how do we sort of create efficiencies in ways that, tying to what Benjamin was saying around records, right? That creates records. And in Kenya in particular, we have some stuff that we've been doing with KCB called Kenneth, right? That is essentially looking at how do you empower some of this sort of like, those small shops that are buying from, effectively large companies through the distribution network to get the record they need to access credit, right? From these institutions, right? There's some other parts of the organization that we're doing work in healthcare, looking at saying, again, ties in, I think Benjamin hit it on the head, the records, right? In the healthcare space, when you look at a lot of mothers today, right? Like, there's not a lot of record around how how often the kids have been vaccinated and things like that. So I think for us, again, the fundamental thing is just, how do you create those sort of trails that then can allow growth for, the owners of those trails? Because I think that's the other hairy thing that happens in this thing. It's like, well, whose data is it kind of thing? It's just looking at, look, this is one aspect of how do you use that trail to then empower these organizations, right, with the right kinds of partnerships to access the credit they need to, to grow. Because when you look at like going back to education, in this part of the world, most of the schools, you look at places like, like Dar es Salaam, you look at, Accra, you look at Nairobi, you look at, like Kampala, a significant majority, I think in Nairobi, somewhere around 60% of school-age children who are in school are educated in low-cost private schools, right? And the way these things started, don't start like, like a massive school. They start one building. It's an elementary school, then it's the next class, then it's the next class, the next class. That's the business that these people are building. Thinking about like, how do you provide them a tool that allows them to, get the kind of records and then allow them to access credit for the next big thing that they're trying to do for the school, whether it's hiring teachers or it's building that extra classroom or, So I think, those are some of the areas I would say that we're working in. Like, there's a lot of work we're doing in education. There's quite a bit we're doing in agriculture and just SME space generally. And then we're, starting initiatives in the healthcare sort of sector because we believe, again, those are sort of like, fairly critical pillars when you think about like doing life.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna jump to our last prompt, and this is looking at the youth. We're all passionate about the youth, and so looking at the numbers, just staggering numbers really, and most of the people that will be logging on or even watching some of these are high school, college, or young professionals. So just want to ask a few questions just on this topic. So the first question, actually, I'm going to go to Kenneth and Benjamin. Is entrepreneurship the answer to, curbing unemployment? So kind of going with the last question, but do you think, harnessing entrepreneurship potential in Africa, is that the way to, curb the unemployment issue we have? So let's go to Benjamin first.
Yeah, I think Toukam mentioned this, and it was spot on earlier on. I think naturally our continent forces everybody to be entrepreneurs, right? Just naturally, because, even if you look at the job market, 76, I'll speak about Tanzania. We have 60 million people. Dar es Salaam probably has more people than Burundi 5 times over. That was just a joke for Devine. But we have a lot of people, and let's say the formal jobs listed that are new every year is maybe about 20 to 30,000 formal jobs. So 76% of our Tanzanian population it works hand to mouth daily jobs. So that's over 40 million people require daily income or daily bread. And so if they can't get that, naturally they're always looking for things to keep up with. That's why during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was really hard for many African countries to do a forced lockdown, because naturally, if people might, because they can't earn income, and food is essential, people will naturally like try to force their way out of it. And so like it was a difficult decision. Some may agree with Tanzania's decision not to do a lockdown or not. We never did a lockdown here. In Tanzania, it's still business as usual outside. You can go outside, roads are full and packed with people going to work as usual. But you can't. It was such a hard decision just to be in that spot of like saying like, all right, we're going to go into lockdown. So back to the question of entrepreneurship, I think naturally our communities, our countries need and just naturally force or segment more and more entrepreneurs that way. So I do think that fosters it naturally. I think where we could all do a better job at helping is just facilitating and training people, let's say, on how to spend their money better, how to make better decisions on what they're doing versus just spending for the sake of spending, or maybe not being able to plan ahead. A very specific example you'll notice, at least we see in patterns or behavioral patterns, especially with lower income folks. Again, going back to the piece of transaction history, we notice that, let's say when payday happens, obviously there's a massive spike in transactions. But then if you look at what the things are being purchased for, it's like alcohol or things like that immediately. And, to each their own, you can't force somebody to think how you may want them to think. But I think just advising them like, hey, if you spend this a little bit of money or save this little bit of money, you could, support the farm you're trying to build, or buy a few pieces of, like, let's say a shovel and just to figure something out over there. So I think that there's aspects of that are sensitive, obviously, to many people. Like, one thing that we see in Africa is sports betting, which I have other thoughts on. It's a really dangerous route to go down. While it makes, large services or aggregate or telecoms a lot of money, there is a moral question, especially the lowest income people are the ones spending the most time sports betting with this false hope of potentially getting rich and getting rich fast. And so, I personally struggle with that because I think governments too, while they try to, sports betting brings a ton of tax income to governments, but at what cost? Is the short-term cost of short-term benefit of sports betting worth the long-term cost of what it does to people mentally? And those are moral questions that we have to all ask ourselves. But I think as businesses or as people, I think the encouragement or trying to advise people like how they spend their money is up to them at the end of the day. You can't force somebody, but you can try to hopefully push them and teach them in a way that could be beneficial to them in the long term.
Thank you, Benji. Yeah, so Kenneth, can you talk about this as well? You have been an entrepreneur. You have had so many startups. I don't even know how many by now. But yeah, can you answer that just about entrepreneurship, startups? And I like what Benji kind of spoke into, even that Africa forces you to be an entrepreneur, to start something because of the lack, maybe. So can you speak into that and your experience, and what would you say to the youth in East Africa?
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Benji said a lot of great things there. I'll start with a quote by Ori Okolo, and she said this a while back, where she said, Africa can't entrepreneur itself out of its basic problems, right? So I've seen this in the last decade. There's been this fetish for startups, everyone start a business, do all this. But what it takes to actually have a successful business is an amalgamation of so many things. It's like the team. You have to be working on a good problem, a problem that actually is a problem. You need a team around that. You need a support system. So there's so many things that actually make a startup or a venture to succeed. In my first company, we were, I think I was about 2021 when we started, and I can say that it was a really, really, really painful process. When we started, we made so many mistakes. We, were I think 7 co-founders. We did everything wrong with, what they tell you not to do. We did it, right? But at the end, when I look at it 5 years, 4 years down the line, after we had started, we had already started to overcome. It goes back to the quote that Benji said, the tide, and then after that, who's naked, or who's actually here for the long run. And, that taught me a lot. But if you are African and what will be the to sort of like, go for? And I'll say that, if you are able to, as a young individual, get in line and get an opportunity, just as Divine said, to work at a place where you can learn as much and not have to bear the emotional burden of entrepreneurship first, where you learn a core thing. So for instance, if you look at me, before we started WeCash, or even, take an example of Benji, before even he started NALA, he had a great educational foundation, went to work at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I am sure, he learned a lot of things there that gave him a base and experience level to sort of use those tools to sort of apply in NALA. In my case, I had worked at a startup before. I had worked as a software engineer. I had a great background, and I also had an access to an amazing support system where I could talk and bounce around people. So by the time I was entering entrepreneurship, even when we're meeting those challenges, you're sort of able to sort of counterbalance against them and know how to proceed. So I wouldn't say that, I'll say that as much as entrepreneurship is in our DNA, it's not the answer to everything. Not everything needs to be a startup. Not every idea needs to be a company. It is really, really important. And then I also say, don't think that if everyone is an entrepreneur, then who will actually work in the company? So if everyone is a startup, then, and so like you find that the people in Africa, and, this is an observation I've made, I've not quantified, but you find that the people that should be starting startups or qualified are actually in a corporate job somewhere, or they're experienced people who can actually like quickly move something and build something that lasts, are, let's say, not even doing a startup. But the people that are actually being encouraged to do startups are even inexperienced. So they don't know where to go. And I think there should be like that type of education, what it takes to actually build a company, and not everything needs to be a startup. So that's my take on this. If I were to go back, probably I would, I don't know how I would have done it, but I'm happy with my journey because I've learned a lot and reflected. But there's many people that have taken my route and you've seen them fall apart, and it's not that easy. It takes a different type of mentality, mindset, support system. So there's no one size fits all in my case, and I feel like we should be, as much as people are telling you like, and maybe I can end with this. A lot of people are telling you, okay, start startups, but when you look even at Africa, where's the capital to start? Where's the environment to even start? Where's the market to even foster a productive venture, right? So as much as people are saying, oh, go and be an entrepreneur, here's the toolkits, you start a business name, that no one is coming to tell you, this is how you should think about the market, should think about who are the investors investing, So there's that whole ecosystem surrounding entrepreneurship, and I feel like everyone is optimized towards one side, which shouldn't be the case. It's good, for a young African listening to this keynote to sort of be honest with themselves and try and get the right tools and experience. Go and work at a company, go and work at Cellular, go and work at MasterCard, work at NALA, work at PesaKit, see how a true venture is built before you go and jump into your own thing. Get a core skill. That's my take.
Thank you. So we're gonna go to Andrew. So Andrew, there's something that Benjamin said in his keynote today. Just to kind of summarize, he talked about the idea of how this crowdfunding for weddings in Africa. A lot of African, countries, they'll do crowdfunding for weddings, and he spoke about the idea of crowdfunding for businesses, right? So these like people-driven development, people-driven funding, kind of like youth movements or people coming, Africans for Africans, supporting one another, just as we would for weddings. because like there's so much money, as he said, that's wasted on weddings. Know that there is a lot of money, but like in the same way that we would be generous to our friends who are trying to do startups. So what is your opinion? How does this look like to have people driven, development, crowdfunding? Is that a need? How would you respond? Or how would you talk to the youth?
For me, how I see it is what people-driven development brings about is participation for everyone, and that's an opportunity to hold the person who you're supporting, or the thing that has brought you together for development. You have accountability in that. You have better responsiveness in terms of people take ownership of what's been built and what's been developed. But when I think about it, let's say from a wedding perspective, I'm not a big fan of how that is done here. It's a good culture. I really like how people come together, but I'm not a big fan of that, because how I usually think about it is, I think first, if let's say you're starting your own business and you need your business people to contribute for it to succeed, at least it needs to have some initiative. So even if we are going to contribute at your wedding, at least you need to have maybe 70% of what you need done. And that could be actually maybe just having the idea right, having the product market fit right, having initial traction. So all the things that we need for us to now come and push you forward. But if you're inviting us to a wedding and you don't have the dress, or you've not bought rice, then it becomes a big. I usually find it difficult for sure to contribute in that manner. But when now I think about it, let's say from a development perspective, where we are looking at community-driven development. One example I'll give is a local government here in Kenya. It's a county government called Makueni County. I don't want to say that they've done a very good job, but I want to talk about a model that I saw there that I really liked. It was about community participation in the development issues. So the county government has an annual budget of how much they want to spend on development of roads, development for factories, the agriculture sector, all the different development sectors that people in that rural community need to prosper. But what I liked is their community groups for each location or for each village that come together to discuss the pressing issues that they have at the time. So if it's in agriculture, they say that we are producing a lot of fruits, for example, but we don't have a factory to process them, or we don't have proper storage, or we don't have an ability to aggregate it so that we can have a better say at how much we sell that product. And even control the pricing. So the local participation is essentially what I think is needed in Africa. And also for you as a young person starting a business, I think the first person you need to think about when you're starting your own business is your community, so the people around you. So go and test it with them. Go and see if they like the product. Go and see if the product makes a difference in their lives, if it's improving their life. Then from there, you'll be able to find ways of getting other people to join you and to support you. And I'm very sure there are very many young people out there who are unemployed, who are just looking for an opportunity to support another business, hoping that that business will grow for them to be able to be employed or to earn something out of that business. So I think community driven development is the way to go for Africa. When we think about it from the government side of development, from the development aid side, and also for businesses and startups.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And let's go to Toukam. So Toukam, it's not just about the Africans who are in Africa right now, the college students, the youth, but we're looking at a lot of some of the African youth there in the diaspora, right? Most of, at least in my country and most of our country, some of the top students, they go overseas to study. And so what's your message to some of those who are, tuning in? Why should they come back home, or why should they invest in Africa?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'd say like, look, a couple of things, right? I think the first one is like, I mean, first part is like, look, it's home, right? Like, I mean, we expect you to sort of like, get the house in order, right? I think that, look, it's basic self-care. I think the second part for me is, and this is sort of speaking from sort of a faith tradition, is that my belief is like, look, to whom a lot is given, a lot is, is called for, asked for, right? And so for me, I'm like, look, if you've been blessed, so to speak, with quite a lot of, whether it's good education or good skill set or whatever, that I think to me, it is an obligation on you to do something with that. And I would say like, look, lastly, last point on that is like, it's exciting, right? I think like, like the kind of stuff you can hear people have talked about as Divine or Benjamin or Kenneth or Andrew, there's certainly lots of failure, but it's very exciting. There's a lot of opportunities. It's very exciting, right? And for me, at least, like when I think about like what I was doing when I was based in New York versus what I'm doing here, it's very exciting. You're at the forefront. You're doing a lot of things that other people are only dreaming about, right? Like, and that, for me, I'm like, look, you're doing a lot of very interesting things that is moving the needle, given the fact that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I think we talked a lot about like, basic infrastructure, right? Like whether it's financial or whatever else. And, those are problems, so to speak, but also opportunities, right? That, like, to me, I think it's, it's like, look, they one, it's like, if you don't come back and who's going to do it, right? It's not it's your home, right? And two, for me, there's like a certain like faith element to it, like, look, you're giving the Lord give back. And thirdly, like selfishly, like, look, it's exciting. There's a lot of very fun things that you can see people on the panel are doing. Like, why not join them?
Thank you so much. So Divine, we're gonna go to you and just talk about. So when looking at the youth, what are the key sectors that you see just kind of changing the statistics, kind of making like a turnaround for Africa? What would you say are some of these key places that we need to be looking at as Africans?
Okay, so I think there are many, but in my head, there are three. And these three are just based on what I've seen in the last 5 years. One, and I've talked about it in the beginning, but one is agric. I think that we have such a huge opportunity in agriculture because we still have 60% of the world. And I mean, the world's arable land is in Africa, 60%. So there's a huge opportunity there to invent, to innovate. And I think if we do the right things and put the right processes, we bring youth into this and we innovate around how people are actually going to agric. I think we can create around 40 million jobs in the next 10 years. There's ICT, of course, all the guys who are sitting here are ICT. So I think there's, if we can build a strong ICT sector.
I tried mine at ICT and I failed. I only did computer science.
So I think ICT is big. I think we probably have 3 million jobs that are going to come from this sector if doing the right things, investing in the right places. And of course, the thing that is growing faster than the industry that's growing faster than any other industry is industrialization. So mining, construction, utilities. I think manufacturing is growing. I mean, we're growing this. If you look at the statistics, it's showing that you're growing about 77% year on year. So agriculture, ICT, industrialization, and I think combined these three could provide anything between 50 to 60 million jobs in the next 10 years. So that's my, those are the things. And so in agric, we have to do the hard work because agric is not sexy. Yeah? So I'm not seeing that young people are just going to become farmers or they work in agric, but agric is so much larger than just becoming a farmer. So we need to really put the right infrastructure in place to incentivize, because this is the biggest job opportunity in Africa. Like hands down the biggest opportunity, because we have the land and we have the resources, we have the manpower. So I think we need to also start looking at that sector. And ICT, of course, is obvious because now all the guys who are sitting on this panel are working in one form or the other in ICT. Industrialization is a no-brainer because that's what we've been doing for centuries. So that's my take.
Thank you guys so much. We're closing the panel now. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for those who came on. Thank you for those who asked questions. We we will send those questions to some of you guys, and we'll reach out to you guys by email and answer those. But